All right.
I think we all know one another, right? So I don't really.
David, have you and I met before?
No, we have not.
So Werner, you've got to do introductions.
Yeah. I don't know.
We're feeling really awkward now.
Either, so I don't know David either. So David, you're welcome just to tell us about yourself, where you're from, what you're involved in, and I'll do the same, and then we'll get started.
Great. Well, I my link to MICN was back when I was a pastor in Bangkok at a church north of ECB called Chengwatana Community Church. So I got to get pretty close with MICN then. And I think the last time I've gone to a conference was a global church for a global world in Hong Kong, and just have a huge passion for international church. Wrote a dissertation on international church. Right now I'm working with a group called Vital Church Ministries, and we do intentional interims of churches that are in transition or in crises. So kind of really working through significant changes. So actually a lot of work from the international church is really also applicable to churches in crises or transition because they were going through so much change. So just have a real love for Hanoi and for Jakob and the work there. So I'm looking forward to today's talk seminar.
Cool.
Hey, David, does your ministry do that for international churches as well, the intentional interims?
They have a small group that's working out of the UK that would be really probably quite applicable to the UK and Europe. And we certainly could really work anywhere. Right now it's probably about a dozen intentional interim pastors and some support staff. So it's a kind of a small group. It's, if you know of interim pastor ministries, where if they were like the army, we would sort of be the Green Berets. We probably take the toughest churches.
Oh, maybe at some point we could connect and talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I would love to see the applicability to the international churches.
So we put all that negative experience for good.
Yeah, we had some difficult experiences in trying to make the most of it. God certainly uses crises to spiritually form us, and so you could see it also on a church-wide level.
Yeah, sound the comfort.
Well, thank you for joining us, David. I'm Werner Swart. I'm from South Africa, but pastoring the international church here in Buenos Aires, Argentina, called United Community Church. I've been here for 3 years now, going on 4th. And it's great that you're with us. This meeting was scheduled specific for our time zone in the Americas to include some of our the churches here in Latin America and in the Americas, really, to be able to connect together around this, what we call a guided ignition, to give some, dynamic content and discussion around a specific topic. And today we have Jakob Bloemberg as our presenter. And then we have on our call as well, David Fresh, who just spoke to you, but he's the international coordinator, leader of MICN. And of course, KR also very heavily involved with MICN, as part of their leadership team. And so I see we've just have someone on an iPhone joining us. If you could maybe introduce yourself, we'd love to know who you are and where you're from.
Hi, this is Jane Deschambrier in Houston. I am one of the MISDN prayer ambassadors, and I'm actually down for the count with COVID. So I'm I'm not going to show myself today, but I am with you praying.
Great.
Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So yeah, I think that is more or less who we are. Did someone want to say something else, and we can just, Jakob, we can just give to you directly, and you can start sharing with us what God's placed on your heart.
Yeah. So maybe regroup a little bit since I know who's in the room. So the recording from this afternoon would be great to use with your crew in South America. so that we can adjust our conversation a little bit, since well, David knows what I'm saying already. KR is very familiar with it as well, so maybe we can go through it, but maybe in a different way. Since KR's, you're not pastoring right now, right, KR?
That's correct.
Yeah. Obviously, you're very familiar with my content. Yeah, so maybe I'll go through the first part and let's see how we can have a conversation with who's in the room. What do you think, David?
I think that's excellent. And because then too, we'll get this conversation be recorded if you guys are all okay with that. But that means those that watch the video don't just get the talking, they'll also get the conversation. And I think we've got a number of good viewpoints because KR was also in Thailand and as well as Kuwait. So I think it's great, Jakob.
Yeah, I think the conversation we had this morning, well, my afternoon, we had a whole bunch of practicing IC leaders. That was very engaging. So my title, Love Your City, 5 Steps to Citywide Movements, is also the title of my book that I wrote after completing my doctorate. And I discovered it during my doctoral study, and from my experience here, 5 steps to citywide movements. 1 is principles, 2 is posture, 3 is process, 4 is partnering, 5 is people. And I want to just touch base really briefly on the first 3, if we have time, on the 4th one, and only pull out 1 idea or thought, and with a discussion question. So it just kind of gets our thinking going, put our creative cap on, and as some ideas might pop up that would be useful, even as an action step coming out of this. Let's start off with principles. When principles, I'm referring to theological principles, and identify 4 theological principles that are very helpful when we think about the city. First of all, starting really big with the kingdom of God, which is all-encompassing. And as Jesus said, pray that his kingdom come and his will be done. We want to see that in our city, but we have such a hard time imagining what that would look like. And so having a good theology of the kingdom on the bookends, on the Genesis to Revelation, and how God has a heart for his kingdom coming into our cities. I think that's a real driving motivation for me. And secondly, shalom, where usually most of us are familiar with the word shalom, meaning peace from a Hebraic perspective. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And then third, place. That I had to get my mind around place, and I read several books on theology of place. But it actually starts with creation. God created a physical world, and he created us physical beings, and he made a physical place, the garden in Eden, where he and humanity dwelt together. So place is actually really important when you go through scripture. And often theology of land is intertwined with that as well. And then fourthly, city, so the built environment, starting with Cain, who built the first city, all the way to the New Jerusalem in Revelation. So these are huge theological themes that provide a lot of underpinning for, what we want to do in the city. So it's not just ideas, we don't just want to run with ideas or new methods or whatever. We need theology underneath of what we're building. And I just want to highlight the theology of shalom, which is most familiar. Shalom, usually we talk about our peace in relationship with God. And obviously Easter just took place. Jesus Christ mediated our peace by sacrificing himself as the Passover lamb. And so now we are given the ministry of reconciliation. And often as evangelicals, we just talk about, we can have peace with God. Peace with God now in a relationship with God, and that restores, even if we dig deeper, restores the imago Dei, and we are created in God's image. So that relationship restores our own self-image. But often as evangelicals, we kind of stop there. But yet the Bible talks about, as much as it's up to you, live in peace, in shalom with others. And so people around us, in our workplace, in our church, in our neighborhood, in our city, when we travel, when we shop, when we take a taxi, everything, as well as peaceful relationships in the community. And there I'm talking about whether it's your neighborhood or whatever community you might be thinking about. And here we specify between city and community. So a local church can serve their community, and together as churches we can love our city. And so this is kind of how I'm using community in my context. And then environment, our built environment, the creation environment. And here obviously we have not done a very good job in the past 100 years. But all that together then forms the social system. And so when God said, seek the peace of the city where I sent you, pray for it, because as it experiences shalom, you also will experience shalom. It's this kind of theological perspective that shalom, wait a minute, it's not just my relationship with God, it includes others in the community, the environment, creation, the built environment, and experiencing shalom in that, and seeking that kind of shalom everywhere in my whole city, with everyone, so that it's transformational for the whole social system. All of society is transformed by this shalom. I think this is how we actually put in effect the kingdom of God coming. So just thinking that size, that big, being integral in how we perceive our mission is really helpful and useful in underpinning all the activities that we want to do in our city. So that can really challenge our mindset, because a lot of these things were not taught in seminary or when we read books for how to pastor a church. So this may be very new for some pastors, and for me it was really challenging to start thinking about the whole city from a theological perspective. And this was one of the questions I wrestled with, and that we can talk about. In what way does your theology need to expand to encompass the whole city? So we're not just talking about theology for church work, but for the whole city. So how do you propose, David, we can go and Werner have a discussion? Maybe just go around and talk personally.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
Maybe to kick us off, Jakob, what was a major shift in your thinking from where you were when you started pastoring in Hanoi to when this kind of took hold of you? What was one of the major shifts that you had to make?
Yeah, for me, it's still very visual. Because a friend of mine, a Lutheran friend, gave me Ray Baki's book, A Theology as Big as a City. And I started reading that. And it just really dropped, the penny really dropped when I was driving around the city on my scooter, and I'm going from A to B. And I just try to go as fast as I can from A to B in our chaos in the traffic here. And I realized, Ray Baki is right. I'm just using the city for my own benefit. And I'm not really thinking now about how I can contribute to the city and how my church can contribute. Even though I'm a missionary and others are missionaries. But when it comes to international church, we have been stuck so long to meeting our needs as expatriates worshiping on Sunday morning. And we were 100% expat at that point. And that's really where I felt convicted, like I'm using the city, even if it's for a church agenda, but I'm not contributing back to the city, let alone, seeking its shalom. So for me to for the first time, I realized I've never thought about Hanoi, even though I'd been here 10 years by then. And this was 15 years ago. So I've never thought about Hanoi from a biblical perspective. And that was just mind blowing.
Very meaningful what you're saying, Jakob. I think for me it is, my journey has been, before I joined the International Church, I was very much involved with city movements. I was part of Harvest Evangelism, Ed Silvoso, you're probably familiar with some of his work.
Yeah.
So I was part of his ministry staff for about 17 years. And we did a lot of this, helping pastors to understand the vision for their city. Now it's interesting, when I moved out of that organization into pastoring an international church, it was specifically because I thought we were not seeing the entire city. It was like the Argentine church was very Argentine, focusing on Argentines and being very monocultural. And so all of these expats, immigrants, even from neighboring countries, were completely ignored, and to a greater extent is still being ignored, and being discriminated against in some instances in churches. And so for me now, moving back, let's say into unreached people, if I can say it that way, moving into English speakers that don't have a place within the Argentine Spanish-speaking church and are not being, and if they are, they're probably seen as a financial resource to fund, because you're an American, you can fund me. So there's a very much a disconnect. And so now in my own, now when I'm standing on the other side of I'm now on the other side of the border, looking back now to the city, this is a very important conversation. How do I move backward now, having been on that side, now on this side, but how do we see it as a whole? How do we bring it together? How do we help the church function together without it being abusive on all fronts? The internationals abusing the city for their benefit, and seeing the Argentine poor churches as a way to give money to so they can feel better about themselves, to then also helping Argentines, pastors and leaders, seeing, okay, I need to see the foreigner and the guy here coming as someone that needs God, and how can I serve him and minister to him? I think that's such a interesting dynamic. And I mean, if I look at a snapshot now, we are light years away from even speaking about that, because each one is in his own camp, probably doing their own thing. That's just my reality at the moment.
Each person or each church in the
Church?
Each church, yeah. Well, and then I guess I'd ask another follow-up question. So there's a church mentality. And then for the people in the pew, or we don't have pews, but whatever. So often, like you said, Jakob, you've got expats coming and going. And when I think about the words in Jeremiah, to work for the good of the city you're in, it was to exiles who needed to settle there. And it was, stop looking back at Jerusalem. You're not going back there in this generation. So give it up, get married, have families, continue, But for our people, it's not always like that. They are going back, many of them, or they are going somewhere else. So they're often looking either to the next place. Oh, after this, I'm going to go here. Or they're looking back to the place they loved or the friends. So how do we get them to care about the city they're in when it's not like they are stuck in that city? They know this is temporary. Any thoughts on that?
Good question. Maybe see what David was percolating in David's head.
This David?
Yeah, the other David. The younger one, not the fresh one.
The spirit only. I think actually another theological point of reference could help. and that is just a, contemplative spirituality where you recognize, you slow down, you begin to recognize Christ in others. You have appreciation for the other being created in the image of God, whether or not they're a Christ follower at that point or not. And you start seeing others as God-given, as beautiful, like the slowness of heart where I could reflect. Then I could start to reflect from the micro on the other to the macro on the city as something that God cares about, something that's, if it's filled with people created in his image who aren't useful to me for just my purposes, filling chairs in a church, but are actually beautiful created beings, then I'm gonna weep for that city. I'm gonna be passionately engaged in that city. So it's just like lean maybe a little bit on another theology could help inspire us in this.
Yeah, you know the phrase, the Christ in me sees the Christ in you.
Yeah.
So very helpful, that kind of thinking.
I'm just thinking as we're talking, when I joined here at UCC, obviously because of I had the connection already with Argentine pastors, I began to join some pastors networks. So at the moment I'm part of two networks. Just to illustrate, the one network is what is called the ecumenical network of our zone here, the zona we're in, and that are all the pastors involved are all from the traditional mainline, what we call mainline Protestant churches, so Methodist, Presbyterian, Mennonite, Lutheran, Anglican, and Catholic. And then I'm also part of another group, which is more of a Baptist Pentecostal group, more of a, let's say independent or more modern or recent denominational grouping. And so being involved in these three worlds, so the international church, the more charismatic or, even Baptist, they're not charismatic at all, but they don't see themselves part of the Methodist and Anglican traditions and the Catholics. And then being part of that other group as well, where there are a lot of liberality in their theology, just helps me to see the width of the body in our city, in our region, and the struggle for them to begin to even think of any kind of partnership for the sake of the city, because of their own theological differences. We had just to have an illustration, we had just a few months ago, abortion was approved as law in Argentina after many years, and the Catholic Church had never permitted that. In a sense, they've been strong enough to hold it off. The Protestant or evangelical churches really got involved in marches and all kinds of things, trying to stop it from being approved as law. But then some of the other churches like Methodist and Presbyterian and Anglican were actually pro-abortion in some individual instances. And so even just that thing showed the incredible diversity of opinion. And I don't know, where someone would have a theology of that abortion would be fine, but that's just my personal opinion, and they have their justifications. And so I realized even in something like that, which really had to do with the welfare of people, the poor and those that, and the medical community and the medical services, and then the social fiber of the city, there was a wide range of opinions and ideas of how the church needed to be engaged with that, And so it's just, I just realize how wide this task is. You know, it's incredible.
I like to think about what you're saying, Werner, how in some ways, if the churches are far apart, and not just theologically, but you're talking about trying to get them to work together, can be difficult. If we can rally around the love for our city or a common mission, that can often bring people in very different places together to say, well, yes, we all agree we want to help the poor in our city, or we want to help improve this. And then you can sometimes find yourself side by side with others that are very different. And we found that in our city, working with other churches has been easier when we're working for the good of the city.
Yeah.
Jakob, you said something this morning that I thought was a really helpful question. It's kind of a litmus test, but you said if the mayor came to you and said, what do I need to do in the city to improve it? Do you know the city well enough? And of course, that starts with a theology, a kingdom theology, that God has called us to restoration, that we're supposed to be recovering that which was lost in the garden, that Christ has redeemed on the cross, and we are in the process of restoring this earth, and that our city is a part of that. And another question like that has always kind of stuck out to me since I first heard it was somebody said, if your church didn't exist anymore in your city, why would that matter? And then they said to me, but I don't want to ask one of your church members. I want to go ask somebody in your city, or go ask the mayor and say, hey, if this church isn't here, does it matter? And if they don't think it would matter, then that's that, and that to me was quite convicting. You go, oh yeah, I need to think about that.
Let me move the conversation to the next step with posture. Some of this comes to the service as we're talking. In missions, in church, in NGO work, we have a tendency to go to the people that we want to reach and do something for them, like go to the poor neighborhood and do a project for them because they are poor and needy, and we are wealthy and rich and have resources and people. So here, let us do this for you, and then leave them again. So this is like in the 50s, it was taking the city for Christ kind of conquest mentality of rural churches to take the city back, like New York City or other places. That was really the posture of the church in the mid 20th century. Obviously, it's a lot better to be in the city, which all of us are, or in a city that's not where we came from. But it's even better to be of the city, to really feel like I am part of this city. And for an international church, that's a harder identity to get, because often we are, like David said, we're coming and going, short-term mentality. We're really not part of the city. We're kind of this bubble, a subculture. But even better is to work with the city. So to work with city government, with local government, with existing organizations, charities, local churches. So that's a real shift. Instead of going to and doing for, to being in and of the city and working together with the city.
I think Jakob, the current COVID thing is making this more germane than ever, because if there was a favorable view towards the church in the community, the authorities would be wanting to involve the church in helping with this COVID thing. Now I've moved back to Canada from Thailand, so I'm seeing kind of the Canadian scene as an outsider, but there doesn't seem to be any value in the political arena for the churches. So it's all about restricting them. And in fact, they'll open restaurants and other things and keep the churches closed. So I think there's a real opportunity, because what has happened is the whole society has shifted away from the church, and they're not going to come to us for anything. They're not going to rely on the church for anything. They don't see the value of the church. One politician said on the news here the other night, it's fine to be a person of faith, but faith is not going to save you from COVID, which is kind of an interesting perspective. On the other hand, I saw demonstrated the other day how long-term investment, kind of like you've had in your city, where my son-in-law and our daughter have invested in a community for 15 years. And they draw all of the churches and the charities together for a big Christmas care every year. But this year, some of the mainline churches, as Werner had mentioned, wanted to do a joint Holy Week series of services on Zoom. Well, most of the evangelical churches in town wouldn't do it because it was being sponsored by the mainline churches. But my family's church, they got involved, and not because they line up philosophically or theologically, but because they saw it as another opportunity for them to reach and be a blessing to the community. I just think we're going to have to see more of that. Otherwise, we're just going to become completely irrelevant. I mean, I think we are irrelevant in many ways in the North American scene for sure, as I'm observing. But unless we engage, nobody's going to come to us and engage.
Yeah. So this model on the screen, you may have heard of it: the 7 domains, the 7 spheres of influence, or the 7 mountains. Doesn't matter. Could be 6, could be 8, whatever. But we are often very church-centric, and our posture really needs to change, and we need to see our place in society. And actually, you don't even see the word church on this diagram, because from a societal perspective, we are just a subpart of the nonprofit sector. So as an institution, yeah, really, we are not in the center of society. But as church members, we have church members in every domain of society. And this is especially international churches have a lot more influence, because in many countries, then depending what country, but often expatriates are experts in something. That's why they are hired and sent over and funded. And so they meet with the whole strata of society, with the president and government, and with professors, with upcoming future leaders in universities, with the poorest of the poor, through the NGOs. So in that sense, the church is actually everywhere. But you know, that whole idea of scattered and gathered. So when we gathered on Sunday, yeah, that's really where they don't see that kind of influence. But when we are scattered, this is where we can have a lot of influence. And when we work together in the whole city, that's where we can start engaging the institution of civil government. But breaking down this big idea of city, you know, it's so huge, so big. How can we wrap our mind around it? And so breaking it down in these 7 spheres is really helpful. And one of the things we are working on here is a research project we started 2 years ago, and just researching each domain. So what is the theology for a domain? What are the facts, the statistics, the practices of the church? What are they doing now? What could they be doing? And what are the opportunities for this future? So each domain has a chart, lots of charts, and statistics and facts, and so that we can actually get a picture of the whole city, and not just me, but all the pastors, not just the pastors, but all the church members, every Christian, not just the church members, but our government and everyone we want to work with. Like, here, this is our research, and this is what we envision the role of the church could be in society in the near future. And actually, our government here is very interested in the participation of the Protestant church in society. But so far, we haven't been able to play a role because, one, the evangelical leaders haven't been trained to think this way, and 2, we wouldn't know what to answer if the mayor would ask, "Oh, well, does the Bible teach about genetic manipulation?" That was a serious question, you know. Or what does the Bible teach about pollution? Because that's the main issue here in the city. And if the mayor does ask us a question, are we ready to answer? Are we ready to participate? So
Wow.
that's all about posture. Are we just inward focused, filling the pews, so to speak? If you don't help me with my church program, I'm not interested in participating in whatever you're doing. That's often the attitude. So how could you adjust your posture to be more open to, and also to be perceived as, working with the city? I think that question David raised is like, we might think we are contributing, but if we would ask the mayor or your neighbor or the people that you're dealing with on the street or in the store.
Jakob, maybe you're at the research stage, and maybe you're beyond. But I'm wondering then, how do you empower congregants to impact those domains? I mean, one is being informed, is what you're saying with the research. Are you seeing different ways to empower and equip people to really participate in and love in those domains?
Yes, so obviously, what I've found, so, take the curtain away. International church looks sexy, but it's really complicated, because people come and go all the time. So in our city, my focus is on establishing a network called Love in Action, to mobilize local churches to do this, so that we foreigners can partner with them. This is where kind of like the rubber meets the road. It's like, as expatriates, we're foreigners, we're strangers, we don't know the language or the culture, we come and go, we're so transient. We need to partner with the local church, but the local church is way behind in some things, and way ahead of us in other things. So that's my focus, and my investment is to mobilize local churches to think this way and to start things so that we actually can join what they are doing. Obviously, your congregants, helping congregants to see their work as a ministry, and to see their work as worship, to see their work as mission, as an ongoing pet peeve of mine that I frequently bring up.
There's that shift we often talk about, or I bring up in my church, that you're a missionary on a secular payroll. And I got that from a member years ago who worked for Exxon. And he was asked what he was going to do the next place he was going. He was going to KL, I think. And he said, I can't wait to see what Jesus has for me there. And it's like, well, you got this big, important job with Exxon. But his mentality was, God is sending me for a purpose. And he said, look, I'm a missionary on Exxon's payroll. And since I heard that phrase, I repurpose it all the time. That's the mindset that we need to have. But that's often not the mindset people come into the church with, right? They come in because there's a felt need. They get it from the church, and then I give money for you, the pastor, or for others to do some ministry in the city.
Yeah, like we had the country director of World Bank here in our church for many years, and she would apologize after service and say, I wish I could do more for the church, So, wow, she meets with the president, with the prime minister, with the vice president, with everybody high up. She's known nationwide. People walk in our church and see her handing out a bulletin, and they're blown away. But I had to explain to her, when they see you, they can see Jesus. They see at least somebody who is a Christian, who reflects Christ, and they will have a better impression of who Jesus is. And not only that, World Bank has funded projects that further the kingdom as well. But that is, people have these blinders on. They can't see how they are influencing or contributing, or the potential that they have.
Can I ask a question, Jakob? and we've had this now with COVID. We've had a very real experience of hosting here at our congregation, being kind of the bridge between city government and the churches when it comes to COVID. We've had two meetings where the health officials and the mayor would come and address the church leaders and kind of give us their perspective and what they think we can do, to help them in this whole thing. I have noticed as we've interfaced with these different powers, there is a real pull there with regards to power, control, my agenda. How have you succeeded in some way in helping people move away from their own personal agenda? Why I am joining this movement is to better myself and see my, like some of the pastors said, I'm not going to come to the meeting because the mayor will only be there because he wants to talk to us about voting for him, for example. And so you have that whole power thing that everyone feels that I'm in there for myself, but maybe the other guy's actually in there for himself. He's not really here for the good of the city. How have you succeeded in not only bringing that mentality within the church, but has that mentality kind of filtered into the people that you've partnered with in the city?
It's been a really interesting journey being an international church in the capital of a communist country, where in the past we couldn't engage with local churches or have locals attend our church. But today there are no more barriers. And in the past there was no conversation with government at all until we started Love Hanoi. And what's been really neat to see over the past 8 years now is that it's become part of the language of the local churches as well, Love Hanoi. And so it's not just that I'm known for it, but actually, and it's on the back of my book, what if the church in your city was known for their love? And that's been quite a journey, but you just keep banging the same drum and using the same language over and over and over and over. And when you have meetings, never ask you, so what's what can you do for me, but always, what can we do for the city? How can we love the city better? What can we do together? And keep saying it and doing it.
One of the things I like that you mentioned is this idea of working with the city. And, KR mentioned about how society doesn't necessarily come to the church, and that can depend. It's a little bit different here because we're in a quote unquote Christian country, so they do come to us sometimes. But one thing I've realized is I think sometimes that's because they don't feel like the church is for the city. I think especially, KR's reference point is North
Right.
America. Sometimes the churches, it seems like they're working against the city when it comes to the vaccinations and health. So the city officials they feel like the church leaders are against them. Yeah. And so I think sometimes it's that question of posture. So when we first had COVID hit, I was actually in Croatia at the time last March, and my church leaders, everything was happening here and we didn't have to cancel church. But there was this whole question, would we cancel or not? And some churches were and some weren't. And I actually sent a statement to my church, even though I was out of the country. I said, we love our city. We love the people there, and we want to be a part of the solution, not the problem. So we're going to go virtual this Sunday as we analyze what's going on and figure this out. And then pretty soon the whole country got shut down. But that was my direction to the church, was we don't want the city officials and our community, our neighbors, to see us as selfish, that we're doing what we want to do for us. We want to see that we're putting them first. And not everybody in my church agreed with the decision, but they all agreed with the posture. And so that was something that was really helpful. And some of that has come from your speaking into me, into my life over the years, to kind of be able to word it that way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's not a one-time thing. It's a long journey. And this process, the Christian community development cycle, has been really helpful to think through. Because often and maybe with, I don't know, with Ed Silvoso, what you did, but a lot of organizations, they just want to organize a festival. So we had the Billy Graham Association come here, and I was really skeptic to start with, to come here for a year, but they're actually pretty good. And they asked me to chair the Love in Action Committee. And so we had a whole year to kind of walk through this process a little bit. I wasn't familiar with this process then, but that's how Love in Action got started. But so many times we want to just have the festival and share the gospel and just draw people to our event. But it doesn't really work that way. So what I tell Vietnamese, because they love parties and festivals and loud noise, and if they could skip the process, they would do that. But to follow this process of community development, then at the end of that process, so when you are working with your city, with your local community leaders, with the people you are serving, and you're using your own resources, and you're not coming at them from we are rich and you are poor, but we're all broken people together. It's kind of like what David was saying. I'm broken in one way, you're broken in another way. We can work together and help each other. So when you go through that process, at the end, you have built relationships, you have built trust, you have had conversations that are personal, and you got to know each other. And then suddenly you have earned the right to speak, and you've earned that platform, rather than grabbing it or paying for it. They give it to you. And we've seen that a few times here, where churches had an antagonistic with their local relationship with the local leaders, and then actually do a community project, even as simple as just giving gifts to those in need in the community. Just simple things that actually are quite meaningful here. And suddenly the community leaders say, oh, why don't you, at the same time, at the celebration at the end, they say, why don't you tell everyone here what Christmas is all about, and then you can invite them to your Christmas service. Like, that was,
Wow.
a totally 180, because of following the process. And it can be as simple as what we call a seed projects, like gifts for those in need in our community would be a seed project. Especially, don't use American money, use your own money to buy the gifts, So that's still kind of like a mind block for them. But there's so many different ways to engage in our community. And here's a list of from around the world, from different continents. So I'm using this list here to kind of stir creative thinking, but actually creative thinking is really difficult in some contexts. But this kind of teaching has been done among provincial churches, among tribal churches in mountain areas who have no financial resources. But I've heard the story, for example, a tribal church had an antagonistic relationship with their local community. And when they were taught this, they thought, well, what do we have? So often we think of money first, but it's really not about money. You always have people. The church always has people. And these people have time and they have skills. So those are assets. So, okay, so how can we use our assets to build community, asset-based community building? They realize, oh, well, we have people, we have time, we're laborers. Thing, in the community that benefited the community. And suddenly that relationship with the local government turned around 180 because of it. And it's just one thing, one small seed project, but it's that changing of the mindset and following the process and doing something with our own resources for the benefit of others. There's a great Eastern message in there somewhere, I'm sure. But this would be my question. We have 5 minutes left. How could you start or move forward in the process? And what is keeping you from starting or moving forward? We all get stuck somewhere. We have our own blockages or barricades. The biggest complaint in international churches is the high turnover, et cetera, et cetera. And the first time I communicated with Warren, the founder of MICN, I was complaining to him about turnover, and he said, "You have to maximize your high turnover for missional impact." So that was the mind is like, how do you do that? But we have to get, beyond these roadblocks that are keeping our intentional churches from being engaged in the city.
Well, Jakob, one of the things I think you're doing, you've said, is you're setting up groups in each of those 7 domains, right? Like a network in
Right.
each domain. And that's with people from your church or with Christians as well as non-Christians?
This is with the local churches.
But like for the one's for business, one's for healthcare, right? You're doing groups. in
Right, the
different-
healthcare one actually has a mixture of foreigners and Koreans. So actually, foreigners, internationals and Koreans are 2 different subgroups here.
Is it only Christians in the
And
group?
Vietnamese, yeah, and that one is only Christian. And then we started the education group and found out the greatest need was among families who are homeschooling, even though that's not a legal thing here. And then found out that a lot of non-Christian Vietnamese parents are homeschooling their children with Christian curriculum. So now out of the 400 group members, 80% are not Christian. So it turned out into something really different, an opportunity. But
Well,
that is what we are doing. We are creating fellowships for each of the domains.
Right, fellowships. That's really intrigued me because I think my background, it's a lot of times what can the church do for the community, which is not a bad thing. We can run a kids camp and people bring their kids that aren't Christian, or we can do different things that we can do. The idea of working with and saying, hey, how about we sit down and talk with some of the business leaders who aren't even Christian, or some of the healthcare workers. That's got me
Yeah.
thinking about how do we do that and get that started.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I think as I'm reading the question over and over again, it's it's a very good question to consider and go before the Lord. And as I just look at our own situation, we have our hands in all of the different pies. I think as a congregation, we're engaged in the slum, which is our municipality is one of the cities in the nation with the highest difference between rich and poor.
Wow.
Because all of our foreigners live in this area. Their international school is right here,
Right.
where you pay $2,000 a month for your child, and then we have a slum area on the other side of a mile, 2 miles away from here, where you have the poorest area, one of the poorest areas in the nation, and we're involved in both. Bridging that gap, bringing those people together. Yeah, I think it's really coming down to, okay, what can I do and what should I do, and time and effort, and sometimes we feel overloaded already. But what is it the Lord wants us to do? That could be maybe something small but very strategic in moving this process forward.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking and contemplating.
I think for me, there's the thought of taking these slides actually and meeting with the leaders. We have a couple other English speaking churches we work with here in our city. And so I think that for me is a starting place, so saying, sit down with the leaders from 3 different churches and say, hey, let's go through this. What do you guys think of this? Where could we start? How could we do this? I think we'll be better together. We'll have more resources as a team, and the city responds really well when we come as a group. Like I found that we try to work, it's not just one church, because for us being a Baptist church, sometimes Baptist is like Mormons to Norwegians. It's like, what, you're not Norwegian Lutheran. What is that? But when it's us and the Anglicans and the, this and that, there's a much more receptive. So I think that for me, just to answer your first question, is a way that we could start here to be more intentional in what we're doing.
Yeah. One principle I learned during my study that really connected with me, or where the church was at here a few years ago. We're getting to that place now of creating the citywide church as an institution. Now, we don't like institutionalized religion, and especially in the West, we're really against that. But without that institution of church, a citywide church, across all these barriers and boundaries and denominational lines and theologies and whatever, it's really hard to engage the institution of government. And they want to engage the institution of church. It's a lot easier and it's a lot better to work that way. And that we've been working on that here among the church leaders. And the funny thing is, so last Christmas, the new chief of police invited all the church leaders, 150 or so, to have Christmas dinner with him at a big wedding place. And one of the reasons is to help the pastors to build unity among the churches. So they see the benefit, and we don't even see it, but they see it. They want it, and to me it's just, I haven't been here so long, and it's so amazing what God is doing in the city. But it's just an illustration of how true that is. Wondering, David, you're in a different, you're coming at church now from a very different angle. But I wonder how this might translate into a vision for a healthy church.
Well, I think fundamentally when we're taking a church through a process of revitalization, we're getting them to re-engage with mission, right?
Yeah.
So they're starting to think about here in New York, we're in upstate New York, in the southern tier of it. So they don't really engage with the idea of city.
Mm-hmm.
But we are getting folks to start to think about those domains. I wouldn't have used the word domains, but that's pretty much exactly what we were talking about, different sectors that we can engage in the community with. And I don't know really how to answer the question, what is keeping you from starting moving forward. I think also the mobilization into communities, missional communities that where people think that Christ followers can be in fellowship with unbelievers and very people in process, and be doing the purposes of the Lord in that. So it's like at the lower level, start thinking about how do we engage with the community and what sectors. We're thinking about education. We're thinking about healthcare in regards to an elderly population. We're thinking about some disadvantaged groups in our community. And then, okay, what does that look like tangibly for us? Well, what groups how can we partner into the community? And for us, it's having a vision of missional communities and what that might look like. So yeah, for healthy church transitions, it's capturing a vision and then and making it very much something that they can move forward on.
Yeah. Well, David, it's 5:10.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm still thinking about what you're saying.
Oh,
It's so good, and I want to thank you,
Well, let's talk again.
Jacob, for sharing this morning. I think it's very, very relevant to us. I think it's probably a very new idea. I think for many pastors that have just been in the city, making use of the city and being here for a short time, thinking long-term partnership with the local church, thinking creating a movement around loving your city. I love that idea. So it's not a religious word. It's love Buenos Aires. It's love, you know, whatever the city is you're in. And I think that's a very effective way of framing the conversation and asking those questions. How are we loving? Are we loving? And how are we loving? And what does it look like if we love together? And yeah, I think it's just a very, very relevant discussion for the time we're in right now. So thanks so much for sharing this morning.
Yeah, I'm glad to connect. First time with MICN South America.
Yeah, and not the last time, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Next time we can talk in Dutch.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay.
Not just South America, but the Americas. For those who may be watching a recording, Jakob, was there a fourth question this morning? Was there a slide with a fourth question?
Yeah.
Let's just show that in case anybody watching the recording would like to be able to, we don't have to take the time now, but I thought this was very helpful.
At a fourth point, so we won't go discuss it, but it's for me, it was a really mind-blowing concept to understand the difference between networks and partnership. Networks, people organize to share common interests, communicate to enhance their individual purposes. And we've been in those shoes, and we've had other people approach us this way, you know, hey, what can you do for me? And we might come to MICN that way, you know, I don't know why I'm here, but how can MICN benefit my church? And so we approach it as a network. The partnership is almost the same thing, but the difference is to plan and work together to achieve a common vision beyond the capacity of any one of the individual partners. So we create synergy. 2 + 2 is 100. So that is what we're really after, to create partnerships. And to do that, we need to set up citywide networks that connect the community resources through the network that then create partnership projects to influence the various sector of society. And so for me, that network I'm working on is Love in Action here in Hanoi, but also in other cities in Vietnam. And but the key is that you cannot force partnerships to happen. You know, I cannot micromanage partnerships. Yeah, I can connect people with each other, and that's one of the things I do. But what I found is, whenever we have an event like a Love Hanoi conference or forum or workshop or something, people connect. You know, these fellowships, they connect, and then guaranteed at the end of the event, there are partnerships. Hey, how about you from this organization and you from this company and you from this NGO? We do something together, and they walk away with an idea. And all I've done is create the event, make a platform, and give people an opportunity to meet each other. And so Phil Butler, he says networks are incubators for partnership. So I realized, so my investment of time is in the network, and making the network happen, making the network successful, creating these kind of events, whether big or small, so people meet each other across boundaries, and you have cross-sector partnerships happening to benefit the city. And so investing in networking is my priority. It's not micromanaging partnerships. Let that be, you know, organic by itself, happening as a result. And that's really beautiful to watch. And so the first question is, you know, are you ready to be a city partner? You know, we want other people to partner with us to benefit us, but are we ready to be a partner with others? Partnering across organizational boundaries, cultural boundaries, political boundaries, denominational boundaries, theological boundaries, language boundaries, lots of boundaries. Are we ready to be the right partner for other people? And that's quite a challenging question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jakob. And just so for those of us here, but also those who may be watching this recording, I love how you've laid it out. You've got the foundation of theology. Our theology has to be big enough to encapsulate the city. It has to be a kingdom theology. Then our posture has to be in the right place. And that leads to this process and partners, which I think, the partners too may lead us some of the projects. Some may come from within or from without. I love the fact that while this feels very big and there's a lot to discuss here, a lot to go through, it's also very simple. My own seed project was starting a games club at our church for board games.
Yeah.
And we have reached out to the community like never before through that. And we have far more non-Christians coming into the church building for this than we've ever had crossing the doorstep. And it's something I like doing. It's my favorite part of my work week because I'm technically at work. But there's also other, heavier ways that we've found that we're able to engage through. I do leadership training, and I've been able to do that with government officials. So that's a different way of working for the good of the city because I can bring those same skills that are transferable. So for those watching, on the one hand, it's some big ideas, but it could be as simple as what are you passionate about? Or it's where's God already at work in the city? It doesn't have to necessarily come out of the church. It could be already good things are happening, and let's just partner with them, with those other groups, and show that the church is also working together with them. Also, I think it's always a good reminder that we have some incredible people in our churches, and we want to capitalize on that. I mean, there are people that are ambassadors in our churches, there's business people, and sometimes all we do is say, well, can you hand out bulletins? And that's a great thing, as you mentioned, to have them doing, but it shouldn't only be that, because sometimes they feel like, oh, well, the church doesn't need my skill set. And I think we can actually encourage them to engage, and because we're thinking too small, oh, we just have the normal weekly church. But how can they help us engage beyond? And I think there's so much potential. And I think one of the things too, we've talked about this, Jakob, is it doesn't have to be an official church program. The people in our church need to realize they are working for the good of the city, and what they're doing day to day and week to week, they just need to have that mentality so we can encourage and empower them that whatever they're doing at work, as they work with the president or the mayor or the businesses, is a part of God's mission. But we are there as this encouragement to give them the support and challenge to be about kingdom business. So I appreciate what you've said. And on MICN, this is what we're here for. So if you're watching this video, if you want to get in touch with Jakob, he would love to be in touch with you to walk through this some more. And that's Jakob, JACOB @micn.org. Or you can always email admin@micn.org if you want to be in touch with us, because we want to see how we can encourage, how we can strengthen churches to be more missional. And also we're looking at how love in action, which Jakob has started there in Vietnam, and it's spreading from beyond Hanoi. But we also are curious how this could be effective in other countries around the world. So if you say, hey, we want to do this in our city, please get in touch, because we would love to take this beyond, right, Jakob, and see how God can use it in other places.
Yeah, and I think you're my sales manager.
Well, that's what we're here for. Well, hey, in closing, would you mind praying for Jakob and for all the churches out there that are seeking to be missional and love their cities?
Sure. And so, Father, we thank you for putting this vision in Jakob's mind and heart. And we see the advantage of him serving a long time in a place in order to be able to build the roads and to build the processes to pull this off and to some measure. And I know he'd like to see more. But in other places, today there's pastors who are wondering how to reach their city, how to impact their city. And I just pray that this message would go forward and that we could come with the same attitude that you coming to serve. And Lord, open doors for churches everywhere to serve the communities where they are, and help us to get the right mindset so that we can align properly with the passion and the plans that you have for the places where we live. In Jesus' name, amen.